we need to talk about the Balance of Competences document. Recently, we put up a post on Scientists for EU Facebook page talking about the 50 secret studies on Brexit done by this government. And Molly Scott Cato, MEP, the Green MEP, was demanding from government that they are released. And we support that because this information needs to be had. One report already had been leaked. That was the one on the NHS that said that by 2026 we could be over 40,000 staff short. And she was demanding, and I think we should all demand, that we see all of those reports so that we can have that more popular democracy, so that we can take back control, so that we can all be informed and in charge of actually what's going on, rather than the executive doing it secretly and hiding information that was funded by our taxpayers' money. Now, when I put this out, there was one comment beneath that said, it's a surprise that the government haven't thought to do something like this already. And they have. And it was big. And people don't know about it. And this is the criminal thing about it. It was called the Balance of Competences Review. So here's the story to it, because you should all know the story to it. When the coalition government came into power in 2010, some of the Conservatives, the Eurosceptic Conservatives, wanted to repatriate a whole load of powers back from the EU because they felt that the EU had taken powers from this country. And the Lib Dems said, no, you don't, because this is just your say-so. If you want to do anything like that, first of all, you have to have a professional, proper review as to whether the balance of powers, you know, what the EU can do in the international sphere and what's reserved for us at the national sovereign sphere, whether that's right. And so this is what then got started in, I think it was December 2012, the Balance of Competences Review. And it was in 32 parts that covered all sectors of the economy, from health and animal welfare to single market to science and development and tech and what have you, and so forth and so on. Now, the first reports that came out in the summer of 2013, the first batch of 6 or 8 or so, and they were on the single market and health and food and some others. And basically the conclusions of those reports were that the EU is doing a great job, and with regard to the single market, a little bit more power to the Commission wouldn't actually hurt, it might help. The conservative Eurosceptics loathed this. Peter Bone said it was an irrelevance, said that it was a government report, not a conservative report, which it should have been, and said that it was a Whitehall whitewash. John Redwood went and backed that up in the press and said that it was a whitewash as well, and they all tried to naysay it, even though that this was informed by civil society, you know, all professional bodies. And anyway, the Eurosceptics weren't having any of it. The next batch is a very, very interesting story, because in February 2014, I was watching the Cad and I on the science one because I contributed to it. I'm cited in it, and I was working with UCL on it as well. My colleague at UCL said to me in February, Mike, you'll never guess what, just a week ago, I asked the government when the science report for Balance of Competences was meant to come out, and they said at the end of the year, guess what? They've just released it. And the ironic thing about this is that that was at the time of the floods in 2014. And David Cameron had just said from Downing Street a few days before that, because there were the floods, no non-urgent documents or reports that don't relate to the floods should be released. Anything non-urgent should be kept so that they're not buried under the floods. And then a few days after that, on February the 13th, at the height of the floods, all of these next set were flushed out without any government fanfare whatsoever. And again, they were very praising of the EU, and it was widely suspected and charged at the time that this was David Cameron throwing a bone to his Eurosceptics, who didn't want to see more reports praising the EU being given any exposure or fanfare. That was in February 2014. Then in May 2014, well, that's when UKIP stormed it in the European elections and got the largest share and got 24 MEPs, which means they've now got 24 funded people. Shortly after that, Douglas Carswell flips to UKIP, so they've got one MP as well. Then Mark Reckless, I think it was in November, so then they had two MPs as well as 24 MEPs, and then this set up the whole panic within the Conservative Party and everyone trying to out UKIP each other and bash immigration, and there were the promises of the referendums and so forth and so on, but it all snowballed from there. But these reports, this Balance of Competences reports, were meant to inform any future negotiation with the EU. So this is also why David Cameron didn't like them, because they gave him very little leverage to renegotiate anything, because they were all very praising of the EU. There was a House of Lords inquiry into the Balance of Competences in 2015, and it said that it was nuts that the government didn't know how much they'd spent on these reports. They estimated it to be about 5 million, but the government spent absolutely nothing on publicising the reports or engaging them with the public in any way, shape or form. And so it was the conclusion of the chair of that inquiry that firstly, it had been a wasteful exercise if the government wasn't going to communicate the results, and secondly, the charge that the Conservative-led government had been putting out that there were too many powers in Europe was just proven false by the bulk of this documentation. But the thing now is that we're seeing it again with these 50 secret studies on Brexit, that the government is collecting information across UK society and industry about what Brexit means, but not sharing it with the public, because it doesn't want the public to see, because it doesn't want public debate. It wants to be controlling it all and controlling the narrative from the executive. You cannot argue that that is popular democracy, that's opening things up to the people, or any of this take back control narrative. It just isn't the case, but we're not going to let it happen this time. We do have to fight to have those reports, all of those reports, come out so that we can all fairly discuss them.